Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you. So many of you look familiar, which means I know we've met before. I'm really sorry that I will have forgotten every name and that I'll be investigating your name badges for the rest of the day. It's been a privilege to see the arc of Uptick over the years. I can't remember the first time I was with you all. I remember Chinese food being involved in DC. It was very lovely, and it's just good to see what God has been doing. We don't often get to see the journey of the Lord's hand on a movement and in a space. So I count it a real honor to be here and to get to celebrate with you all and join with you all and all of that stuff as well. Before I go any further, if we could just pray, that'd be great. Lord, I want to thank you for how you've already been moving, but we know that there's more for us. And so we simply ask you, Lord, to come again, to speak again, to meet us again in your name, for your glory and yours alone. Amen. I think it was the title of our time that got me. I think it's Imagine Living Out of Rest. And imagine living out of rest. I don't know whether just thinking about it, I thought when we're imagining things, I'm maybe imagining somebody else cooking for dinner or imagining opportunities. But I thought probably this is a phrase that we actually probably should pay attention to imagine, because I think in the Western world, living out of rest is something which is seen as a vague ideal, a random opportunity, a distant reality in some way, rather than something that we believe in, just something that there's lots of things that we believe in that we don't do, though. There's lots of things that we believe in that feel impossible. And so I like the idea of us even beginning to imagine what living out of rest could be, knowing that it's how the Lord has designed us. And so before I even get into what I want us to get into, I wonder what blocks us from imagining living out of rest. I wonder what interrupts our imagination and gets in the way, what makes it seem like that's an ideal rather than a lifestyle. A few months ago, I took a sabbatical. I took it because it wasn't given to me. And then I realized that at that point I employed myself, so I was the only one holding me back from it. But there are a number of reasons why I couldn't imagine it. As Archie said, I'm a Nigerian, I'm a Yoruba Nigerian, I'm a child of immigrants and I'm an immigrant. Work is what we do. When I was born in London and my family were living, all the women in our family were nurses. My aunties were nurses. They worked nights and they worked days, and then they worked more nights and then they worked days. They were sending money home whilst building homes. It was just how we did. It's funny how in some of the language of the culture that when it used to cuss out immigrants, it talked about us being lazy whilst we were working 24/7. It was really odd how that would go out. But our family did work. They did fun as well, don't get me wrong, but they did work. It was what you did. It was just how you functioned. So the idea of living out of rest seemed like somebody else's thing. Our family wasn't especially wealthy. The area which we grew up in, I lived in central London, is completely gentrified and lovely now, but back at the time it was kind of forgotten. And so vacations and things were what other people did. And also because we were immigrants, when you had time off, you went home. And you got to work at home because you're taking care of your aunties and your uncles and everybody's your auntie and uncle, because it's not just a blood thing. It's just they're older than you, so they're your auntie and your uncle, and that's just our job. That's just our way. And so resting at home was another form of activity, in a way. And that was our normal. I'm not saying that as a complaint. It just meant that when it became imagining living out of rest, I didn't know what I was imagining. I didn't know what that would look like. And in coming to the Lord, I knew that you took a day off and everything, but that was a chance to get other things done in some ways. The things that you'd put off all week, you'd maybe do at the end of the week. My mind was limited because of my experience, because of our economics, because of our realities. This seemed like somebody else's talk. Somebody else got to think about what it was to imagine living out of rest and dreaming in some way. And so when it came to taking a sabbatical and having a break, and I'm going to talk about some of the things from the sabbatical, but that's not the point of our time, because there's days of rest, there's weeks of rest, there's a whole continuum. But when I was at this moment early in the year, I remember calling my sister, my siblings and I'll tell you about them later on, are real close. And I said, sis, I need to take a sabbatical, and I feel like the Lord's telling me to take one, but I don't want to take it because it feels like a privilege. It feels like a privilege. And she said, what do you mean? And she knew what I meant, but she was wanting me to talk, which was a nice change. I said, what do you mean? And I said, well, when I think of our aunties and my mum, and I think of our uncles, they didn't get to have sabbaticals. When they were doing degrees, Nigerians do degrees. I don't know how many you know, but you know that they're like everyone's working on a master's or a PhD at any given time. Or you're a disgrace to the family, and or something. But they were doing their degrees whilst working, whilst cleaning somebody else's house, whilst doing this, whilst taking care of everybody's kids. I said, and why do I need a sabbatical? That they didn't get to have them. That's not what we do. That's somebody else's do. And my sister, she said, Joe, you're not responsible for what our aunties did. You're not responsible for what our uncles did or didn't, or the opportunities they did or didn't get. But if you sense this is what God's inviting you to, you need to take it. If we were all supposed to get rest. So them not getting rest and you not taking it because of them doesn't get you rested. You kind of resisting what God's offering you just because they didn't have the opportunity doesn't actually honor what they didn't get to have. In any way whatsoever. And so it helped kind of shift my thinking. And I say that before we go into some of this, because some of the things I may suggest may be like, well, that's great if you can have it. And for some of us, even taking a day off is an act of faith. It really is. Us taking a day off is a sacrifice of praise to the Lord, is laying down a deeply riven way of doing things, is letting go of the fear of where the next dollar is going to come from. Is entrusting ourselves to God in a way that we haven't had to, in some ways, to live out of rest. For those of us who are entrepreneurial, you work, you get paid, you don't, ... And so to pause in those moments and to entrust the results to the hand of the Lord in life, in working ministry, it can be a challenging thing. And so I want, before I go any further, for you to imagine for a moment what stops you, or what are the things that may stop you living out of rest, and keep that in your minds. And I'm not going to get you to share that with anybody just yet. Keep it in your mind. Is it your history? Is it the family you've come from? Is it your own propensities that before you even look at a topic like this, it already seems stacked by privilege, stacked by money, stacked by a family system that is not your own? Because if we come to it with those things in advance, then the revelation the Lord wants to bring us finds it's a bit harder to get through, because our experience is shaping our theology rather than our theology redefining and radically transforming our experience. And we want the Lord to meet us there. So with that in mind, with the imagination, I want to remind us that living out of rest is more than an imagination thing with the Lord. It's an invitation. It's an instruction. And there's a moment when Jesus in Matthew's gospel is on the stages of history talking to a chronically wearied people who have been searching for God, people who have been waiting 400 years as a people to hear from the Messiah. 400 years, oppressor after oppressor after oppressor, just rinse and repeat. 400 years of vacuum, of nothing, where the 10 commandments have become 619 or 613 rules and regulations. You're not going to do well on 600 rules and regulations. You're going to fail somehow. Just by breathing in the wrong direction, it's going to go wrong. They have been wearied by the hope deferred. We all know we're not just tired by the busy, we're tired by longing. We're worn out by longing as well. And into that space, Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and let me teach you, because I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. So my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." When he invites us to come, it's an imperative in the Greek. It's a command, really. It's a command to a people who have been worn out and wrung out. Where it says weary, the words in the Greek are talking about your labor, your toil, your hard and disagreeable work, the ongoing labor to the point of exhaustion. And there we might be thinking that those things we just need to push through. That may be our Western, whatever context speaking through. We don't hear the Lord inviting us to push through. And until we hit a wall, because there's a wall at the end of the wall. And walls hurt when you go towards them at high speed. Come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens. Those burdens are, in the language there, is like a burden like on an ox, but also and it came to be understood to mean being oppressed by the legal burdens in the world around you. The expectations in the world around you. And then when he talks about giving you rest, it is ceasing from labor, but it's also refreshing and being able to rest up. And as Paul said at the beginning, it was that we're talking about not just the words of Jesus, but also his way. We see that in his way. When we look in the arc of his life, we see him pulling away from the demands of the crowds. We see him pulling away from all stuff we all know. All stuff we all know that Jesus did and was part of how he functioned and how he lived. But we see him inviting us to he's given us a place to put our burdens down. A place to put our chronic conditioning of always working, of not resting, of not having a moment to breathe down, so that he could be a source of refreshment for us. I wonder what a witness it would be to the world around you. I wonder what a witness it would be to your family, to your friends, to your people, to see you rested. I wonder if you'd even recognize what a rested you looks like anymore. I wonder if you'd think differently. There are fun things that and when I say fun, it's an English way of saying terrible things that we do when we're tired. When we are at the end, we're at the end of the end of the end of ourselves. I remember one time in my 20s when I got into a chunky amount of debt. And the chunky amount of debt had one source. I was tired, and I was doing Christmas shopping for my nephews. And the woman in the store was just talking at me, and I needed her to stop talking. And she was asking me things and offering me things, and she was trying to sell me a card with an interest rate that was in my favor. It was not in anybody's favor. And I just took it to stop. I needed her to stop. And so the way I needed her to stop was I remember grabbing it, signing something and leaving. And then in about maybe a month or so later, realizing quite what I'd done. You don't make your best decisions when you're tired or when you're exhausted. But the way of Jesus is one which says, come. And we know that in Jesus doing this, he's restoring something. He's restoring from our very origins, our very beginnings, what even in our creation, design for rest. It's weird that we could get so far away from our design specifications, really. It's weird that we could get so far away from the way God made us and think this is the norm. That overwork is the norm. That we don't even call it overwork. When I think of my family background, we called it necessity. We did what was necessary. We did what was required to put food on the table, to support various people and all of these things. So it didn't feel how did it feel overwork when it's barely covering bills? And yet our relationships knew the impact. And our bodies over time knew the impact. And the discord within our souls and the disconnect knew the impact. But at the same time, it felt like necessity in some way. And yet our original design is something different. Our original design is experiencing God in a place of rest. I'm always struck by in Genesis 1, 26, 27, I can't remember which one it is, it might even be 28, one of the 20s, where God makes humanity in their first experiences blessing. It says, and then he made them in his image, and then it says, and then God blessed them. And it's not like, and then God said, this is what I expect of you. Or, and then God says, this is what you must produce for me. Or this is how you need to be. That it's just a place of blessing. By the time we reach Exodus, though, we know there's a very different story. By the time we reach Exodus, though, we meet a people who again are oppressed, who again are completely controlled by a nameless Pharaoh who is just exploiting them for productivity, who sees fit to make harsh and terrible conditions out of their own insecurity and their own control and the willingness to dominate people, to dehumanize people, and then brutalize people, and then extract from them. And then when God sets his people free, he brings them to a new place and sets them a framework for them. And I simply want to just remind us of a verse and just what a friend had said to me about it. He said here, as God gives out his instructions, remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living amongst you. For 6 days, the Lord made the heavens and earth and the sea and everything in them. But on the seventh day, he rested. That's why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. And a good friend of mine who is a messianic believer said to me, she always says to me when she talks about this, she said, when our people were brought out of Egypt, they had no framework. They'd only been property until that point. They had no days or nights. They had no permission or freedom for anything. And so God gave us a framework on how to live, how to breathe, how to be. And so she said, when I find it hard to take a day off, I have to ask myself, what's holding me captive? Where's my captivity? Because when I look back in my history, all I see is when we can't take a day off, we're held captive. We're owned by something, someone who shouldn't be owning us. And so I simply want to ask you as a question to pause and reflect on, who or what is holding you and I captive? What holds you and I captive that we can't rest, that we can't take a break, that we are overwhelmed? Is it the expectations of those who pay your checks? Is it the expectations that drive us within? What are the things that hold us captive to? Are we captive to achievement or perfectionism? Perfectionism sounds so good until you realize it's a toxin that poisons you. What are the things that hold you captive to ongoing activity in some way? That means you can't break, you can't take a day off. Are they the words of people that you're still trying to prove yourself to as leaders? Trying to validate your capacity to in some way? There's this nursery rhyme, it's not even a nursery rhyme, but I heard it when I was a kid, that we used to hear when we were small, saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That traveled across the Atlantic, that curse. And it's such a lie, isn't it? Like, give me a stick any day. You got a stick, I got a stick, we'll go stick to stick. We'll see who wins. Give me a stone. If you're about to throw a stone, I'm not going to sit around and wait. I'll leave. But words have a way of getting under your skin, buzzing around your mind and embedding themselves in your heart. And before you know it, your life is a reaction to that word. Your life is a reaction trying to prove that you are always or you're not never or whatever. And it takes itself out on you. And I wonder whether for some of us, living out of rest has become an impossibility because we're captive to what other people have said about us or said to us. I wonder whether living out of rest has become impossible because we're kind of still haunted by the lies that the enemy has structured through the systems in the world around us. But thankfully, we serve a God who took captivity captive and one with whom the truth sets us free. It's just that overwork is so sanitized. It's seen as so impressive. And one of my friends had told me that the research done in the corporate space was found that when you gave people unlimited days off, they actually take even less. And so it's proved useful saying as part of their employment packages, you can have an unlimited vacation because people don't use them anyway. Somehow this thing which we know crushes us physically, emotionally, relationally, spiritually is so sanitized that we award when people violate it. And we admire people and we call it a worth ethic rather than an addiction. Do you know what I mean? We call it like hard working rather than violating your very being. And we haven't worked out that it's a deception from the enemy. That it crushes us, it crushes all that we are. I remember many years ago when I was in Sheffield with Paul and Ellie, and we were working for the church, and our pastor was on sabbatical, and they had a guest guy called Steve Nicholson came in. He's a leadership developer within the Vineyard movement. And he said this, and it clearly has stuck with me. He said, you can't cheat the Sabbath. Eventually it'll catch you up because you'll be living on adrenaline and you won't realize. And he said, and then after a while, you'll behave like you're drunk. He said, so don't cheat the Sabbath. that was his offering that afternoon. Don't cheat the Sabbath. I wonder how many times we've cheated it. And it's painful to think about, isn't it? How many times we've cheated it. It's important for us to reflect on this. But a Jesus-shaped reset is an invitation to learn a new way of being. When we look at where we've been, when we look at where the culture is, we're always going to feel bad about it because America really does love working. America really does love busy. I don't know I've ever been to anywhere that loves busy as much as the States does. And so when we look at it, we'll only ever feel like, oh my gosh, I know I should rest more. But what we want to think of, particularly as leaders, is the how. And how for us, and then how we model it in our environments and our teams, and how we bless it and celebrate it in our communities, so that we can, live in the way that the Lord designed us, because we know that as we live in the way he designed us, we thrive in the way he designed us to thrive as well. And we are people who are about human flourishing. So when Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest, take my yoke upon you, what could this look like? I think there are a couple of things that we could think of. We could think of what for ourselves, where rest is likely to get disrupted, where we're likely to interrupt rest. And I've noticed over the years that it's come in two areas, two primary areas, that it gets disrupted when if there's a broken area of my identity, like if I'm trying to prove something, or it gets disrupted if there's a broken area in my purpose. I know that kind of covers all the things really, but pick which one, work out which one is the one for you, because that's where your battle over rest will be. So if you know you are driven to please, people call it the disease to please, don't they? If you know that you're driven to please people, and that's the space, then maybe that's where you need to invite the Lord to do some work. Maybe that's where the healing needs to happen. Maybe there are words that are still beavering their way around your heart and reshaping your functions. Maybe that's where use things like tools like using the word no may feel like a spiritual battle for us if we feel like we're letting somebody down. Maybe that's where we need to observe where identity gets disrupted. Or maybe it's in our purpose, or a lack of clarity in our purpose, because we're trying to discover things. We're trying everything to stay relevant, trying everything to stay appropriate, and calling busy discernment, calling busy progress or practices, when actually it's just busy. That's all it is, it's just busy. So it's worth thinking of where rest gets disrupted. But one of the things I found on a practical level, and this is what I want to spend most of our focus going through, is from a book called, I don't know if you've read a book called Sacred Rest. It's a phenomenal book by I think I'm a few slides. I'm so sorry I messed up on the slides. I think I'm a bit further on than I said I was going to be. Thank you, my friends. Thank you very much. A book called Sacred Rest by Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith, and I heartily recommend it. She is a doctor. She's a believer, passionate believer, and she talks about 7 types of rest. And that I'm just going to use as maybe a framework for us when we're thinking about what living from rest can look like, rather than crashing into rest and having an occasional injection of sleep and then going back, because that's not resting, that's just crashing and stopping for a little bit. And as we think about this, I want to invite us to think of it in a number of ways. Because on one level, we can look at all of these things and think, I don't have time for all of it. So I'd want you to think of, if you only had 10, 15 minutes, what this could look like. If you had a day, and then if you had more time. I like to think of how I do things for free because it's cheaper. So if you didn't have any money to spend on it, what would you do? If you had a little bit of cash, and you know what that looks like for your world, and if you had unlimited, and I would encourage you. I would encourage you to get a book, but I also to encourage you to think about what this looks like for you, your household, whether that is roommates through to whether that is family. Think of what it looks like for your teams. Just allow yourselves to work with it a bit, because we need anchors to get on. We need to get real practical with the battles that we're so susceptible to. With the battles that we've normalized as just the way it is, we need anchors in some way. So just a few examples here. So when she talks about having 7 types of rest, the first and the most obvious one is physical rest. Physical rest. And I want to invite you to ask yourself a question. If your body could speak to you, what would it say? If your body could say anything to you right now, if it wanted to kind of sit, if your body could speak, there are some of you who are looking uncomfortable already. I'm so sorry, except I'm not sorry at all. If your body could speak, what would it say? Would it say, seriously though? Would it say, I used to have a very disembodied understanding of my faith. It was like I had a vision, I had a passion, my body just needed to get with the program and catch up, and that because I was passionate for the Lord and I was committed, and then I was tired and then I was spent, and then I was a mess, because it's all happening there. You have one body and your leadership lives in it. So if your body could speak to you, would it say, could you take care of me, please? Would it say, stop talking about me the way you do? Would it say, would you not drag me everywhere all the time like this? Would it say, vegetables are real? Vegetables are real. And they are good. Try them. Rinse and repeat. Do you know what I mean? What would your body say to you? Would your body say to you something about sleep or the lack thereof? Would your body say, you're nicer when you drink your water? You just are. Hydration needs matter. Or would it say things about different life stages that you're at and what your body is doing? Pay attention. Pay attention to the natural changes that happen in our bodies in the eras of our life. What would your body want to say to you, and are you paying attention? And actually, do you know how you like to rest physically? Have you given that any validity in your life? Maybe just getting outside and breathing air, fresh air, things like that. What are the things that help you get physical rest? Pay attention. Pay attention to what that could look like for you, and check whether you're at a deficit in this area. And for us as leaders, we need to know in advance what that deficit looks like. Because by the time it's taking its toll, something's often happened by then. There are some apologies that are about to come around as a result of that. Mental rest. Mental rest referring to maybe, I don't know about you, whether you had any decision fatigue over the last couple of years of all the decisions we had to make and all the things we had to know and all the things we're thinking through. And for those of us who are looking after families, whether that's families of our children or whether it's our parents, our aunties, our uncles, we have broad definitions of what family looks like. Maybe thinking about them as well has taken its toll. And then you come home from work and then your other job begins. Do you know what I mean? Or if it's all happening in the same building, you go into one room to a laptop and you come out and then you do it again and you're deciding and thinking and thinking and deciding and deciding and thinking, and now your mind is maxed out. The mental load is too much. Have you thought about what rest might look like for you? When Jesus invites us to saying he'll give us rest, it's a refreshing. What refreshes your mind? Maybe not thinking about those things. Sometimes instead of refreshing our minds, we escape. We escape into Netflix. We escape, and don't get me wrong, I love a good show. I'm not here to say, don't watch TV, because that would be hypocritical of me. And also I love a good show. But we know the moments when it is just, I need to shut down. Or when we just keep on escaping. Is it mental rest that you need? And for some of us, if you I take my day off, and you're still feeling spent, I would encourage you to look at the other areas you ain't rested. When I took a sabbatical, I wasn't physically tired, I was tired of. I was tired of people. I was tired of disappointment. I was tired of unanswered prayers. I was tired of things. And those things were bringing me to a standstill. Actually, they were bringing me to anger, and we'll get to that when we get to another area of rest. Too soon, I feel, too soon. Okay, sensory rest. In a world of overstimulation and our access to technology, which is amazing, how are we overstimulated? My eldest daughter's in college now, but when she was a baby, there was a moment when you'd know that you'd left it too long before she went to bed. She's very much on a limit. She's always been that way. She needs certain times. And you miss that time, you play with that time, you dare to go around that time. Dear Lord. She would go quiet and smile, and then you'd look at the smile and you're like, you look like you're grimacing at me. And you look angry. And then she would scream, and her lungs would amplify for the next 30 minutes because she just couldn't take any more. The thing is, I don't believe that just happens to us as babies. We just find other ways to articulate it when we're older. When you are overstimulated with the doom scroll of the news, and you're overstimulated with every sensory hit and every dopamine hit that is out there as you switch and change devices, and they're useful and they're helpful and they're wonderful for work, and yet are they like a second layer of skin? Could you step away from them? Could you let go, or do you have to have them now? Could you give them up at any time? Or would it kind of give you the shakes? Would it be like giving up caffeine? Which might be a thing we could talk about another time. What would it feel like? Or basically, do you need a break? I don't need to say that anymore. And the next one, creative rest. Creative rest. I want to read a quote from Dr. Sandra's book where she says this: creativity is more than just art. It's any type of innovation. A lot of people over the pandemic used an excessive amount of creative energy because everything as we'd known it had changed. There was a lot of problem solving required, which means that there was a lot of creative energy required. And most of us, because we don't see ourselves as creatives, never thought about how we would pour back in that energy as much as we were draining it. And so this recent era I can't even imagine the things you had to fix and change around over the past few years. But I wonder if you're getting any forms of creative rest that is regenerating you. And again, her point here, creativity is not just for those whom we traditionally call creatives in some ways. What brings you life? What restores you? Is it art? Is it beauty? Is it getting outside? Are you engaging in that as part of the ways of bringing you back to life again? I wonder, America seems to be more into C.S. Lewis than Brits are, so I like to give a Brit reference every so often. In his, C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Screw Tape Letters, and it's like this older demon mentoring the younger demon. It's a whole thing. And in that time, there's this bit where the older demon challenges the younger demon for letting his charge, the human being, just enjoy life. Said, you're not allowed to let them just enjoy life. Don't let them just go for a walk and enjoy it, because we've got nothing to tempt them with when they're seeing and when they're regenerated in that kind of way. And it's interesting, isn't it, when we're so focused and we're doing such important things that maybe we don't rest creatively, that we don't enjoy the beauty that the Lord has created, the world that he saw and was good. On my sabbatical, I spent a lot of time listening to jazz, because it's jazz, friends. And that was the only reason that needed to be given for it. And a lot of time going to galleries and observing art and just taking it in. A lot of time listening to 90s R&B as well, because, well, again, no explanation required. But I found it was catalytic. I found that just enjoying beauty and enjoying these things that had brought me life, both then and in times gone by, had begun to restore some things. Now, that's just me. There may be other things for you. It's just that you need to know what creative rest looks like for you. Whether it takes place on a hike or a long walk, whether it's cooking for your people, whether that's the thing that's creative, that's the problem solving that you can actually solve. Rather than saying, I'm going to use all my problem solving for helping people in a pandemic, that's lasting a time that I don't know how long it's going to take, about masks that people don't want to wear, getting angry about things that they don't even know what they're angry about, and I'm going to fix that and call myself a pastor. I mean, is there any wonder people were resigning and giving up and saying, we're done here? I wonder what's regenerating and restoring you. So those are just some of the examples. But then she goes on to talk about, can I see the next slide? That'd be great. Emotional rest. At some point, as leaders, and it's been alluded to already, we need to put somewhere the things that have been put on us. The things that have weighed us down. Maybe if we've been in ministry if we've been alive, actually, for any length of time, there are scars we've picked up along the way. There are parts of the story. And we can't just keep on imbibing them and calling it stoicism, or saying our people don't do this, or we don't talk to people. We just keep our private things private. Not until it becomes public. We can't keep on living with not finding somewhere to place the load. We can't always be the strong one and then collapse under the pressure of it mentally, psychologically, emotionally. Part of our rest, and Jesus says it, that those who are weary and burdened, is finding a place to put those burdens. And I'm sure all of us are more than happy for people to bring their burdens to us. But I wonder where you go. I wonder whether, like me, you got tired of. Whether you got tired of disappointment, got tired where you lived that verse from Proverbs, hope deferred makes the heart sick. By the time I'd gotten to my sabbatical, I remember some of my friends suggesting, saying, you need a break. And one of them was praying for me, and she had this picture, this vision of saying, Joe, on the outside you're fine, but it's like internally there's internal bleeding from the wounds. And some of them have been there a long time, and you've done what you could because you did what you could with what you saw. But you only heal so much each time. It was like getting knocked down and getting up slower each time because you hadn't fully restored. And that was actually the conversation before I went before the Lord, and I thought, and the only idea that came to my mind was, how'd you take a sabbatical? Take a sabbatical. And then thinking, sometimes there are areas of our life that one prayer session isn't going to fix, friends. Things that took a number of years to get there don't always take 10 seconds to get out. Things that I didn't realize how formative disappointment could be. I didn't realize how formative heart sickness could be. But being ground down again and again, and even in the last 4 years, throwing ideas at the wall, watching them stick for a while and then just slide and squeak their way down to the floor, I ran out of faith on that one. I was just like, yeah, all right, then let's keep throwing it. Let's keep throwing it again. And living in Minneapolis, I live in the Minneapolis suburbs, in 2020 was it was a painful time nationally. It was a very painful time. I was sick of people. I was sick of Christians. I was sick of foolishness. I didn't have time for this anymore. And I felt powerless to do anything about the anger that I felt. And so you keep going. You keep going. I couldn't see my family. My family are in different continents. You can't get on a plane and see how they're doing. You can't do anything. And fed up. And fed up. Fed up. And you're watching people crushed and crushed and crushed by life, by story, by all the things that are going on. You're hearing things, feeling their heat, and when they're frustrated. Where do you get your emotional rest? Do you have a place to go to fall apart? Or are you waiting until you fall apart to get a place to fall apart? I want to invite you to find it early, to know where it is. For me, what it looked like was lots of therapy. For me, what it looked like was a spiritual director. Neither of those things are things that I necessarily grew up knowing anything about. However, I've learned this. I would rather get therapy than need it. Do you know what I mean? I'd rather get it. I'd rather have it for a few years. I'd rather have what one of my professors used to describe as the small humiliation of saying you have a therapist than the rather big humiliation of the impact of your life when you've not had one for a decade and you needed it. And sometimes it was just someone to talk to. I just needed a space to put things down before the Lord. And for me, I needed the accountability of saying it out loud to somebody in someone's hearing. And then, but also alongside those, I needed friends. I needed my peers, people who I could talk to who saw my life as well. Sometimes it's easy to run into these things and then run out and no one knows what you said and legally they can't say. So you still need those spaces as well. What do you need for your emotional rest? Which leads me to the next one, the social rest. And I think Vernon already highlighted it for us in terms of the need for community, about resting with people, your key people. And again, the takeaway that for me from my sabbatical still is, I went to see my siblings. But at that point, it was the first time we could all be together. I have a brother who lives in Hong Kong, me living here, and the others in the UK. And I remember us being in the room together and me looking and thinking, oh, I'm not a weirdo, I'm just one of us. Because they're just like, we're similar. We have the same kind of quirks, we talk the same, we have the same parents, which has accounted for a lot of things. So many things. I'm the youngest in my family, and the siblings basically raised me. They were my kind of psychological safety, they were my protection, they were all the things. And they understand the certain moments in life where I can't act or function. They understand when I say, I can't get a sabbatical because it feels privileged. They understand when they say, what about our aunties? They understand. And you need to have rest with people who understand. Who understands your story? Who understands where you've been, where you are, where you're going? And just as Vernon shared with us this morning, and as actually Paul referred to at the beginning as well, how are we gathering so that we can not feel so alone? There's a TED talk called The Lethality of Loneliness by Professor John Cacioppo. And he talks about the physical impact of loneliness on our bodies, cortisol levels, impulses, and sleep. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. But it's this reality that this on our own just isn't working. Are you getting social rest? Is part of your resting with people? Now, some of us need to recharge on our own as well. I'm offering this to you to say, what's your rhythm of this? What's your rhythm of this? And then finally, spiritual rest. How are you in the Lord? And and Dr. Saundra talks about this in corporate settings as well as in faith-based settings. And so she said, yes, it refers to faith, but also meaning and purpose. I think it's the Message version of Ephesians 1, 11 and 12, where it says, it's in Christ you find out who you are and what you're living for. Have we lost sight of what we're living for? I needed to pull away for a while to find out what I was living for. Because disappointment is formative, because heart sickness is formative. I needed to pull back and have the Lord speak a fresh word into my life. I needed to have some time with him. In my dream world, just keeping on going, maybe I'd get the vision again. It didn't happen. I realized I needed these rhythms of pulling away so that I can recharge with him. We retreat to advance. It's like pulling an arrow. Not that I do this on a regular basis, obviously, but anyway, it's like pulling an arrow. If you pull it back to its point of greatest tension, it can go forward. If you pull it back a bit, it's not going anywhere. And I see, when I think of us living out of rest, I'm thinking of us pulling back the arrow. Pulling back the arrow with our weariness, with our burdens. Pulling back the arrow to the way we've actually been designed to be people of overflow. So it's the overflow of us with the Lord. It's the overflow of us living into how he made us. It's the overflow of how he's wired us flowing out into a hurt and broken world. It's the overflow that gives us mental clarity. It's the overflow but there's no overflow when we haven't reconnected. There's no overflow when we're not remaining. There's no overflow when we're not retreating to advance. I want to urge you to get rest because your life depends on it. I want to urge you to get rest because your leadership depends on it. I want to urge you, yes, because he commands it, but because we need it. And we need no longer to live under the yoke and the burden of what the world says. But as it says in Romans 12, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I don't care what the world says. We are burning out at the rate of goodness knows what here. And we are lighting the candle, both ends and in the middle, and wondering why something's not working and why we smell burning all the time. It's us. We're on fire, and not in a good way. Not in the good way of on fire, just crumbling. Just melting down and taking out everything with us. So let's imagine what it means to live out of rest. But let's do more than imagine. Let's hold ourselves to it. Let's hold one another to it. Let's make sure we know how we rest. Let's look at these 7 types or whatever tool you need. And let's take the time to make this a priority in our working lives with the Lord. Does that make sense? Just before I hand over, I'd love to just have a moment to pray. I was reminded of that part in John 13 where Jesus comes and washes the disciples' feet. And it's this wonderful picture, isn't it, of Jesus kind of humbling himself and getting into the dirt of someone's life. It was seen as such a disgusting thing that even a Jewish male slave could refuse to do it. But him washing them clean and this water being this symbol of cleansing and refreshing, and literally, but symbolically of refreshing as well. And my sense was, just as we began the day, that I know all of us in some ways are tired, but just this sense of the Lord wants to come and wash our feet. He wants to soothe and heal and wash away the dirt. Some of us have been walking this journey for a long time now, and we've got cuts and scars and they've got infected. Some of us, we've been walking through the dirt of other people's stories, and some of it's stuck. Some of us just don't want to walk anymore. We're tired. Give me a car. It's easy. Do you know what I mean? It's more simple. But whichever it is, I want to invite us maybe at our tables, maybe just to turn and pray for each other for a minute. That the Lord would come by his Spirit. And if there's someone on the table that there's a particular thing and you've got time, I think we've got 1 minute and 20, 19, 18 seconds. But let's just take a moment to pray that the Lord would bring restoration and bring healing and bring freedom. Would that be okay? All right. Sorry, I don't have any music to make this less awkward. Please go. Mm-hmm.